mondo del fitness, del mondo dell'apparecchiatura. È nata, abbiamo visto un piccolo video che ha raccontato un po' questo ultimo periodo e ha fatto vedere insomma la crescita del nostro sport. Come dicevo, siamo qui in questa sede ospiti per il secondo anno consecutivo. È nata anche una collaborazione, annuncio adesso, è stato firmato un accordo in cui ci vedrà insieme a Tecnogym presenti con i nostri tecnici nell'anno, magari poi Costantino lo spiegherà meglio, dell'anno 2000 a partire dall'anno prossimo, quindi sarà un'altra vetrina dove potremo presentare il nostro sport insieme a un partner così prestigioso. Quest'anno si parlerà del settimo convegno, la corretta gestione del recupero per il miglioramento della performance. Ci saranno importanti interventi, quindi penso che, come è sempre stato di tradizione, sarà un convegno di grande livello. Non voglio dilungarmi molto perché la giornata è lunga, siete in tantissimi, non tutti purtroppo sono riusciti a intervenire perché lo spazio è quello che è, ma cercheremo di rendere sempre più visibile e presente questo convegno nei prossimi anni. E niente, grazie a tutti e buon lavoro per questa giornata. Grazie. Ecco la parola
e ovviamente abbiamo il piacere, per gli onori di casa, ho il piacere personale, visto che è diventato nel corso di questi anni un amico, è il direttore del Dipartimento Scientifico di Tecnogym, Francesco Cuzzolini.
Buongiorno a tutti, bentrovati. È assolutamente bellissimo vedere il nostro auditorium tracimare di sport, passione, vederlo così pieno di sport è una cosa molto, molto bella. Tecnogym è un'azienda di sport, di movimento, di esercizio fisico a 360 gradi, quindi il vostro sport un po' riassume anche molti dei principi che Tecnogym applica. È uno sport di passione, di allenamento, di resilienza, ma anche di tecnologia, perché Tecnogym è appunto l'azienda dell'esercizio fisico e della tecnologia. È bellissimo avervi qua, ringrazio ancora chi questa mattina alle 7:30, i valorosi che sono venuti a fare l'early morning workout. È stato bello con voi riuscire a condividere un po' di dettagli sulla nostra tecnologia. Vi ricordo che questa possibilità di andare a toccare con mano e fare un confronto anche sull'allenamento, su quelli che sono i numeri che poi l'allenamento e la tecnologia può offrire, sarà a disposizione durante la pausa pranzo. Non voglio dilungarmi oltre, voglio solo regalarvi un video che, per chi non c'era lo scorso anno, riassume quella che è la filosofia di Tecnogym e cosa Tecnogym è come orgoglio nazionale per il mondo attuale.
Siamo nati per muoverci. Il corpo umano è nato per percorrere ogni giorno grandi distanze come facevano i nostri antenati. Oggi percorriamo in media meno di 1 chilometro al giorno e la sedentarietà è causa di gravi rischi per la salute. Siamo di fronte ad un'involuzione della specie. Nel mondo, 2 miliardi di persone sono in sovrappeso. Con l'idea di rimettere in moto il mondo, nel 1983 Nerio Alessandri fonda Tecnogym nel garage di casa. Una missione precisa: diffondere il wellness lifestyle. Il wellness affonda le proprie radici nella qualità della vita italiana, mens sana in corpore sano. Lo stile di vita orientato al regolare esercizio fisico, alla sana alimentazione e a un approccio mentale positivo. Il wellness di Tecnogym è cultura, consapevolezza, passione, emozione, esperienza. Nel fitness, Tecnogym è divertimento, energia, stare insieme ed essere in forma. Nello sport, Tecnogym ti permette di migliorare la tua performance, superare i tuoi limiti, tirare fuori l'atleta che c'è in te e seguire le tue passioni. Nell'health, Tecnogym migliora la tua salute, ti permette di rimanere giovane, prevenire i rischi causati dai cattivi stili di vita e recuperare le tue prestazioni fisiche dopo un infortunio. Tecnogym è innovazione, design, tecnologia, formazione, programmi di allenamento. Tecnogym è oggi una community globale. in cui si riconoscono 40 milioni di persone nel mondo che praticano regolare esercizio fisico grazie ai prodotti, alle soluzioni digitali e ai programmi Technogym in 80.000 centri wellness e 300.000 abitazioni private in oltre 100 paesi. Cuore pulsante di questo movimento è il Technogym Village. Si tratta del primo wellness campus al mondo, progettato e costruito per ispirare il settore e per far vivere una vera e propria esperienza wellness a collaboratori, clienti, medici, istituzioni e operatori di settore. La struttura comprende la fabbrica all'avanguardia, progettata secondo i più innovativi criteri di benessere sul posto di lavoro, il centro ricerca e innovazione, il Wellness Office e un grande centro wellness dedicato ad esercizio fisico, cultura della qualità della vita e sana alimentazione. Il Technogym Village ha ispirato lo sviluppo del Technogym Ecosystem, un vero e proprio ecosistema per il lifestyle management che ti permette di avere a portata di mano il programma wellness personale ovunque tu sia, a casa, in viaggio, al lavoro, nel tempo libero, dal medico, nel club e all'aperto. Wellness on the go, every day, everywhere, per farti vivere un'esperienza unica e personale. Ad ogni età, quando vuoi e dove vuoi, puoi vivere esperienze diverse per le tue diverse passioni e aspirazioni con i format Technogym. Per tutti i segmenti di mercato, clubs, hotel, corporate e medical, Technogym è in grado di offrire una gamma di prodotti che comprende Artist Line, Skill Line, Excite Line, Selection Line, Personal Line. Con Technogym puoi vivere anche a casa tua un'esperienza personalizzata con Personal Line, la soluzione per il luxury living che si integra al tuo arredo. La piattaforma digitale My Wellness di Technogym ti permette di analizzare il tuo stato fisico, personalizzare il tuo programma di allenamento, condividere gli obiettivi, misurare i risultati e partecipare a sfide. La piattaforma My Wellness è aperta al tuo stile di vita e compatibile con le tue app e wearable devices preferiti per offrirti una seamless connected wellness experience con la possibilità, grazie a Technogym Live, di accedere anche a casa tua, live o on demand, ai contenuti e ai programmi dei migliori fitness studios del mondo. Con My Wellness, gli operatori di settore e i personal trainer possono offrire i loro servizi alla wellness community online e offline, in ogni luogo e in ogni orario, e sviluppare business models innovativi connessi con le assicurazioni, con il medico o con i programmi di welfare aziendale. L'innovazione rappresenta da sempre il motore della crescita di Technogym, che da 35 anni promuove l'evoluzione del settore, dalla biomeccanica al digital, fino a trasformarsi in un media content provider. Technogym è un brand globale, fornitore ufficiale delle ultime 7 edizioni delle Olimpiadi e al fianco dei campioni dello sport e delle celebrities di tutto il mondo. La responsabilità sociale di Technogym coinvolge tutti gli stakeholders nel progetto Let's Move for a Better World, nato nella Wellness Valley, in Romagna, la regione italiana conosciuta per i più alti standard di qualità della vita nel mondo e oggi promosso da Technogym a livello globale. Health is wealth, per uno sviluppo sostenibile. Star bene conviene a tutti, cittadini, imprese e governi. Let's move for a better world.
Sono sicuro che sarà una giornata molto intensa di networking, di confronto, di aggiornamento, quindi a nome di Technogym, a nome del nostro presidente Nero Alessandri, buon lavoro.
Concludiamo questa prima parte con una breve introduzione. Quando abbiamo dovuto pensare al tema di questo convegno, ci siamo domandati, in questi anni ci siamo molto concentrati su quanto allenarci, e giustamente, no? Quindi sui criteri che riguardano il volume, che riguardano la densità, i parametri principali dell'allenamento fisico. Quindi diventava cruciale parlare di somministrazione di carichi, di monitoraggio del carico e giustamente domandarci quanto dovessimo allenare i nostri atleti e quanto duramente. Credo che siate d'accordo con me se chiedete a un qualsiasi vostro atleta quanto ti alleni o come ti alleni o se ti alleni bene, lui ti risponderà enunciando questi parametri. Mi sono allenato bene perché ho fatto X chilometri in più, oppure sono riuscito a reggere intensità più alte. Raramente nel vocabolario di un atleta, e mi viene a dire anche di un tecnico, c'è l'attenzione al come recuperi. E quindi ci si è resi conto nel corso di questi anni come tra il successo e il fallimento sportivo non fosse importante solamente dedicarsi ai carichi, ma anche parlare di recupero. E quindi è stato questo lo spunto che ci ha portato a definire questo tema. Oggi cerchiamo, anzi saremo sicuri, di risolvere questo dubbio atletico, quindi quanto dobbiamo allenare e quanto dobbiamo preoccuparci del recupero, evidentemente generando un bilancio tra queste due aree che riguardano l'allenamento sportivo. I relatori del pomeriggio ci aiuteranno a capire dove collocarci, parlando a proposito di equilibrio e di balance, dove collocarci all'interno di questa bussola, no? Evidentemente cercando di evitare di andare verso i numeri più alti. Chi di voi mi conosce sa che sono un inguaribile innamorato dei classici, e quindi sono andato un po' vi propongo questa suggestione, essendo un'introduzione su cosa ci hanno insegnato i nostri avi, e cioè il concetto di ozium. Nel mondo latino il concetto di ozium era un concetto virtuoso, non era legato alla perdita di tempo come possiamo pensarlo noi oggi, ma appunto, come potete leggere, era un tempo dedicato ad accrescere i propri talenti fisici, intellettuali e morali. E quindi perché non rivisitarlo anche noi in questa giornata come qualcosa, come un tempo dedicato al ristoro, alla pianificazione, alla creatività. Abbiamo dedicato poco tempo in passato alla strategia, prima di pensare al programma d'allenamento vero e proprio. Domandiamo di più ai nostri atleti e domandiamo a noi stessi prima di tutto che obiettivi vogliamo raggiungere con i nostri atleti. E tutto questo si fa all'interno dell'ozium, ovviamente, non si fa al campo, in piscina o sulle strade mentre si pedala. E l'ultima suggestione che vi lascio sull'ozium è quello che sostanzialmente ci differenzia dagli animali, no? Quindi se pensate al regno animale, gli animali non si dedicano a nessun'altra attività che non siano quelle istintuali legate alla sopravvivenza e alla procreazione della specie. Quindi la suggestione che vi propongo è di passare da un concetto di ozio e quindi di recupero, no? Passatemi la metafora, come momento di non allenamento, no? Io ho avuto, ormai sono un po' un dinosauro, no? Quindi ho avuto parecchi atleti, parecchia esperienza per potervi dire che ci sono atleti che rasentavano l'equilibrio psicologico quando non potevano allenarsi, no? Talmente erano legati al fatto che perdere qualche giorno d'allenamento fosse la causa di tutti i mali. E quindi come ci insegna in un bellissimo libro di qualche anno fa il sociologo Domenico De Masi, dobbiamo recuperare il concetto di ozio creativo e quindi di riposo e di recupero come qualcosa che contribuisce alla nostra performance, che incrementa la nostra performance. Sempre in ambito di suggestioni vi propongo una definizione di allenamento che ovviamente non troviamo sui libri di metodologia, ma ce ce la suggerisce Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, che è l'autore del Piccolo Principe. Se vuoi costruire una barca, non radunare uomini per tagliare legna, dividere i compiti e impartire ordini, ma insegna loro la nostalgia per il mare vasto e infinito. Siamo fortunati ad avere a disposizione tutte queste piattaforme che ci aiutano tantissimo nell'elaborazione e nel monitoraggio dei carichi di allenamento, ma non dimentichiamoci che alleniamo prima che atleti delle persone e dobbiamo continuare a coltivare i loro sogni, perché, come dice un mio caro amico seduto qui in prima fila, questi ragazzi spesso ci dedicano la parte migliore della loro vita. Do la parola al moderatore della mattinata, che vedo già bello reattivo. Prima però fammi passare l'ultima slide. È una foto che ho scattato personalmente e vuole essere una ispirazione. Questo è lo stadio Panathinaikos, Atene, non dico altro perché so che ci potrebbe essere anche qualcuno di particolarmente scaramantico, però l'ispirazione è che possa guidare questa giornata. La parola ad Alessandro Bottoni, che introdurrà Joël Pillon.
Buongiorno a tutti, mi ha rovinato l'introduzione. Entriamo subito nel merito, quindi aprite le menti e preparatevi le domande per la parte riservata alle domande questo pomeriggio. Per introdurre Joël c'è da... voglio partire sempre dai giovani, io ho questo pallino dei giovani e diciamo un giovane per arrivare all'alto livello deve poter sviluppare tutta una serie di competenze che lo portano nell'alto livello a saperle gestire ed essere responsabile di un processo di successo. E questo vuol dire anche saper gestire con estrema raffinatezza quel sottile bilanciamento che c'è tra carico e recupero. E in alcuni modelli di successo, come quello di Joël dell'alto livello, vedete che non c'è tanto bisogno di tecnologia per gestire queste cose, ma fondamentalmente servono due cose importanti, che sono un tecnico di alto livello sempre presente sul campo e un gruppo di lavoro fondato che lavora sui principi giusti del carico e del recupero. E ci introduce, partendo da questo punto di vista, sul tema il nostro Olympic Performance Director Joël Pillon.
Okay. Thank you again for having me this year. I'm going to apologize for my Italian is not quite enough to be able to do this kind of presentation, although I'm learning. When I was asked to talk about recovery, I really think about training and training load and training management. So that's going to be my theme. I've got my notes here in English, so I'm not checking my text messages here. So the context is, for this talk, is optimal performance. And that can mean Olympic athletes, but it can also mean any athlete. Optimal means how are we getting them to achieve their ultimate potential as athletes. Because I think very few athletes achieve everything that's possible. So that's my first thought about this topic. So I'm going to talk about general philosophy of training, how does that impact recovery. Training load management, specifically about how do we manage the training load to achieve optimal performance and thinking about recovery. And then the other topic is how do we plan in order to achieve optimal performance. What is our planning impact? And finally, some modalities. Maybe you could expect me to be talking more about modalities, but in my work, the modality parts, the tools that we use for recovery are secondary to how we manage the training. First, a quote and a general thought, a philosophy. The next slide, you might recognize this quote, but the next slide, it says who it is. So if you're overtrained, you actually didn't train hard enough to handle the load that you asked of the athlete. So you weren't overtrained, you were undertrained. And I think this is a theme I see here in my work often. We need a little more of this. Let's prepare our athletes to do more. Let's not place limitations on our athletes.
Allora, i concetti diciamo sono scritti in italiano, io mi preoccuperò poi alla fine del suo intervento di fare una sintesi delle cose che ha detto, in modo che potete, diciamo, che tutti hanno la possibilità di capire bene quello che sta dicendo.
So on this theme, we place a lot of limitations on what our athletes can do. And they have limitations on what they think they can do. And I think part of our job as coaches is to expand what's possible. And this concept that they can do more is very important in our work. They must do more if they want to achieve their full potential. I come across very few athletes that are really overtrained, but a lot of athletes who can't handle what we give them, but we have to progress what they can do. Next. So I start with a preface. Obviously, Floyd Landis doped to win the Tour de France, but this quote is a nice quote. I don't believe that the man or the athlete that trains the hardest wins, but we need a little bit more of this. We need a little bit more of the attitude. If we want to win, we have to go out from our comfort zone. And our athletes in general, I see, are afraid of being tired. They're afraid of the extremes. And we need to challenge them to go into the extremes a little more often. And I'll give some examples of that. So, I disagree that the athlete that trains the most wins. But this idea is a good idea for our athletes. And in general, what are our limitations? Let's explore them. Let's explode our limitations. You can do more, and our athletes definitely can do more, and they need to do more. This is a model called long-term athlete development, LTAD. And it describes a pathway or a philosophy from children to elite. And I think often, at least in my work in high performance, we focus on the training to win part. But in fact, our athletes often, they don't know how to train. They didn't pass the learning to train phase. And for me, learning to train is really important. And I come across this often. Learning to train means, can they manage themselves as athletes? Can they manage intensity as athletes? Or do they have discipline and control in training? And often the answer we find is no, not yet. They need to learn how to do that. So we pass in mentality to training to win, when in fact we didn't learn to train, or ultimately going to the Floyd Landis slide, training to train. Really, that's what that means. They have to progress to a level where they can actually train at a workload where they can achieve their ultimate potential. And my thesis is most of our athletes never reach that point because they're stopped because of their own belief, our fear, their fear, all kinds of limitations that are ultimately self-imposed. So we need to think about this progression. There's only a few athletes in the world that are legitimately trained to win. But they need to pass through these stages. And probably you never ultimately learn everything. All athletes, even the very best, are constantly learning. You never have it totally figured out. But we have to think about these concepts of passing through these stages. Learning to train, ultimately training to train. Finally, we're ready to have a look at how good our athletes can really be. How good can they be? Talent doesn't really mean anything until you pass through these levels. And now you're expressing your talent through the work that you're doing. This is a slide I came across this week. Christian Blumenfeld posted this on his Instagram, usefulness of social media. We now know, in a way, what many of the best athletes in the world do. They share. It's a very interesting environment. And I put this out as an extreme. This is not what every athlete should be doing. But you can see roughly 1,400 hours annually. So he just copied this from Training Peaks. This is what the app looks like. Very handy, data at our fingertips. But obviously he didn't just start training at 1,400 hours a year. He progressed to that. But I put this as an example of what's possible. How many of our athletes, even high-performance athletes, are even doing half of this? Are they exploring the limits of what's possible to reach their full potential? And the answer is no, so that's our job. We have to help them explore those limits of what's possible. So on to some training load. We've talked general philosophy now. Let's talk about some specifics about how we can get the most of our athletes. And these are all factors that affect recovery. So come back to the theme of recovery. This is all what affects it. Probably the number one thing that we need to manage as coaches, but the athletes need to learn how to manage, is how they manage their high intensity sessions. Of course, so much focus of our work is on the specific high intensity sessions. And of course, we tend to overdo it. It's the biggest single problem that I see in training is athletes that go too fast or too much high intensity training in a single session. So that's what this means. Volume per session. And specifically, I'm talking race pace. That means Olympic distance race pace, but we can talk about threshold race pace if your athletes are doing different distances. What about threshold pace? If you're doing more than these volumes here, roughly 2K swimming, 30K cycling, 8K running at functional threshold, 100% threshold, you're starting to push the limits. But this is what I see often. But I know many of the best athletes in the world, they don't push these limits very often in single sessions. So this concept of dose of training, how much stress in one session is a good amount of stress, is important, and we often overdo it. We do too much. You know, the classic workout, it's a stereotype, but if you're an Olympic distance athlete and you do 10 by a K on the track, 10 by 1,000, that's a very big session if you're doing it at that race pace. And we never do that at race pace, but it's very common. So if we're doing too much at race pace, that impacts recovery. And what does that mean by recovery? It means it impacts what you can do the next day and the next day. And that starts to become where we fall down, because we can't be continual, we can't be consistent if we overdo single sessions. I put this slide last year, but this is a template that I use. Obviously there's a lot of information here, but the point here is the density of intensive sessions. So how many quality sessions do you try to do per week? And that's the other factor that impacts recovery, is if you typically try to do more than 2 of each sport, two runs, 2 bikes, 2 swims, at proper high intensity, then you can end up problems with recovery. And so it's more or less a universal standard, but more than 2 of each starts to get difficult to maintain any kind of volume over time. So the principle that I'm always thinking about is not what they can do in one session, not what they can do in 1 week. What can they do over 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks? Now we're talking about a training program. One session, 1 week, doesn't matter. What they can do over long periods of time is where success is coming from. So it comes right back, how do we manage each week? I talked about this concept at the top last year, and Alessandro mentioned that it could be misinterpreted, this concept of minimum effective dose. what that is about what is the right training load in a session, the right stress, the right amount. It doesn't mean over the whole picture we're looking for the minimum. If we're about the minimum, it's perhaps a mentality that we're not going to achieve the maximum performance. But relating back to the previous 2 slides, single session and density per week, what is the minimum dose of intensity that impacts our athlete's progression? So that's where sometimes smaller is better. But coming back to the Blumenfeld slide, doesn't mean less volume though. The part that I've been thinking a lot about in the last years is the integration between swim, bike, and run. And it's what makes triathlon special. How do you integrate the 3 sports? And they do have an impact on each other. For example, we know when an athlete is in a high-stress running training phase, or even one session, that the swimming is most likely to suffer. Most likely it will get suppressed. And if we know that, that's fine. But if you have an athlete that needs to improve their swimming, then we need to think about how much run loading are they doing. Are we willing to do less run loading in order to see progression in swimming? They have an impact on each other, and we have to understand that. That's why ultimately the model of one coach who manages the 3 disciplines has proven to be the dominant global model so that we can manage these 3 interactions. Also, strength training has to be integrated. The next point we talked about in the last, how many key sessions. So you don't need to do 2 sessions of high quality in each sport every week. You can do less. Some athletes may be better off just with 1 run session or 1 hard ride, depending on the terrain they live in. We think about the optimal for each athlete and how that impacts their recovery. The 4th point is ultimately the most effective training is what the athlete can absorb, what they can recover from. But let's bring that back into the context here of we need to expand what they can recover from. They need to progress what they can recover from. If we say the athlete can only tolerate 8 hours a week of biking, for example, and that's what they can do, and we put a limitation on them, then how are they going to progress? We need to expand those. So we cannot be afraid of being tired. We cannot be afraid of doing good work, a lot of work. Like to Blumenfeld, how much is this guy training? He's training a lot. We want our athletes to compete with guys like this. We can't do half of what he's doing. We have to think about how do we progress to get there. We're not going to get there in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, but we have to move in that direction. And finally, I'll talk about this, but simple progressions about training. That'll be the next. This one I see a lot. It's coming always about intensity here. But I see a lot of athletes training at their dream intensities and not at reality. And this has a big impact on recovery. We have athletes who train like they're 30-minute runners, but they're not. And it's the wrong intensity. And training like a 30-minute runner, if you're not in 30-minute shape, is not going to get you there. It's going to overload you. We have to train where they're currently at, current physiology. And this is very relevant as we come up to the start of the season. If you're like our elite athletes, right now is when they start training. We have to adjust the training load for current fitness, which will be low. And that's fine. And they progress over time. So I see a lot of athletes, I hear stories about athletes all the time who are doing running sessions faster than Mariam Mola. Why? Why? When I hear that, I think, why? Why are junior athletes around the country doing run sessions faster than arguably the fastest runner in the history of triathlon? But this is happening. And we have to think about why. Sometimes it's because we're searching for confidence. We want to show that they're a good runner. But this is where management, control, and discipline on part of the athlete and on part of us as coaches is critical. So let's get them to train at the proper intensity for themselves, where they are today. Easy running too fast, Again, very common now that we can measure everything. Athletes are wearing Garmin watches, satellite watches, they can always know their pace. I've noticed a creep to faster running, a change to faster running all the time. But again, this can affect recovery over time. I never worry about an athlete going too slow in training. There's no such thing. If you're training 1,400 hours a year, it doesn't matter if you're running at 5 minutes per K for your easy runs. But it's a very common error. The same with tempo and heart intervals. Any intensity, if our athletes are training at their dream profile, not the reality, we're going to have problems with recovery. And so we need to manage that better. We need to know our athletes. And having them slow down a little bit is not a big error. Going too fast is generally a big error. All the biggest mistakes I've made in my career are too fast, never too slow. The other point that I see often, that I think about all the time, is simply progression of our sessions. Do they stay the same all year, or do they change? Do they get harder and then stay hard the whole year? It's very, very common that I see athletes, they reach a certain workload and then they just stay there. And then over time that becomes toxic, and the athlete can no longer recover from that. The stress becomes too high. These are progressions that I often use at the beginning of the year. You can see here, none of the workouts are very big. We change the recovery. None of them are going to be very fast. This is just a progression. Over 6 weeks, we go on the track, we progress. It's simple, repeatable, and we often do this more than once in the year. It's not just at the beginning, but we progress. But we need to plan that through the season. So we don't just reach the big workouts. I mean, 6x800 is not a big workout, but we don't just reach the biggest workouts and stay there the whole season because we're racing then. So we need these restart points. And as we roll into the planning part, how we think about the season and how we progress training and plan training becomes really important to impact our recovery, and probably most importantly, the ability of the athletes to perform well through the whole season, not just at one point, but other points in the season. It's possible to perform very well in March and very well in September, very well in April, very well in August. It's not, we don't need to think about, oh, we must peak and then everything else is sacrificed. It's not necessary. I showed you this slide last year. My thoughts are the same on it. The fundamental part, the uninterrupted training before the season starts. I think that a lot of the success that we have is what we do in the winter months. An accumulation of work, accumulation of chronic load in the winter before we start racing. And I see a lot of athletes and coaches interrupt this phase with more racing. And they never actually get to the point where they can sustain a high load of training because they're off doing, I don't know, a 10K or a duathlon, or they're doing something, but they're not training. And I think the point about the opportunity cost of racing is important. What are you doing when you're racing? You're not training. And training is, frankly, racing is not very good training. The maintenance of volume and frequency through the season. You can see after the first few races, we revisit training, come back to it. I think you can see that after the first 4 races, there's another training block. We cannot be in a specific training phase the whole year. We've got to come back and revisit that foundational work. So when we're planning for our athletes, we need to think about where can they revisit some long rides, some long runs, some endurance, some hills again. We cannot just enter the racing phase and stay there for 4 or 5 months. Performance will degrade if you do that. And the balanced number of races versus training. This has been a big project for me here, is getting the athletes to accept to train more and race less. I've yet to meet an athlete that needed to race more. I meet all kinds of athletes that need to train more. And it's having the discipline to do that. Athletes like to race, it's fun. It's why they train in many cases. But if we want to perform big when we want, we have to train. We have to put the investment in. The last point here, the right load at the right time, relates to all of what we've talked about here. Individual sessions, intensive sessions, how many per week, what type. It's got to be right for the individual, but let's not make that a static point. It can change over time, and it must change. That's my main point here. It has to change over time. The very top athlete, it doesn't change very much. But even then, it still has to change a little bit. That inconsistent, interrupted preparation prior to the main season goals. So this is a bit different point than just in the off season or otherwise. But many of our athletes are afraid to do a training block prior to a major championship. They think they need to race. And in my experience, this causes problems. Prior to Olympic Games, prior to World Championships, prior to European Championships, any major event like that, we have to be confident to do a training block. And many times our athletes are wanting to race. Why do they want to race? Because they want to find confidence. We need to get them to find confidence. They need to learn to find confidence from our everyday training. That's where success comes from, our process every day. I know that if I have a clean month, an open month prior to a championship, my athletes would be able to perform well. We don't need any racing. The next point I made already, the specific training period. When we get close to races, we want to train like the race, but that has a cost. Too much of that is the most common in-season error I see. We're in a racing phase and the athletes are still doing specific training, running hard off the bike, very specific sessions. When we're in a racing phase, we don't need that. We need to manage our intensity. The athletes I work with rarely run in anger off the bike. Almost never run hard off the bike. We can do that when we race, and we do that at the beginning of the season to make sure their brain is calibrated to the effort, but that's all. And finally, this point about racing to train or training through races. My belief for most athletes, training through a race is a bad idea, meaning you don't rest. Most of the time, if they don't perform well, then they're going to lose confidence. And that's not a good thing. I think when we race, we want to race well. That's why over time, for the top athletes, we gradually reduce or eliminate small races. So they no longer benefit from these kind of events. I think we need to respect competition and how the athletes feel during competition. Its impact to their confidence. So we don't train through races. The things that I focus on for recovery are really simple. Are the athletes eating enough to manage their volume? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on their environment. When we're on a training camp with full board, yes, they'll eat enough, probably too much. When they're at home, are they organized? Are they prepared? One point I could say about the timing of nutrition to adapt to high-level training. Eating dinner, eating your last meal too late in the day can be a problem if you're training early in the morning. Eating too big of a lunch, problem. Very Mediterranean type nutrition habits, but very hard to incorporate in my experience with high-level training and high-frequency training. Are they sleeping enough? Are they sleeping well? This is a problem with many of our young athletes. As you probably know, on these things, too late in the day, too much screen time impacts quality of sleep. But nutrition and sleep, if we get these things right, the recovery focus is going to be 90% there or more. Quality nutrition, quality sleep. And I believe athletes having regular therapy, not just massage, but physiotherapy or other types of therapy to avoid issues. And obviously, when you're training at the highest levels, you need more of this than when you're a recreational level. But for optimal performance, we don't want to wait until we have problems. We want to have regular therapy to anticipate when the training load is perhaps on the high side, or when we might have an injury that could be coming. And we can prevent that by taking appropriate action beforehand. And the last point I think is critical and comes all the time, and that's being willing to change your training when you see that you need to change it. So not stubbornly following the program that's on the paper or on the screen just because it says that. If you need to change something, change it. If the athlete or you are too fatigued, we can make adaptations that will impact your consistency over the long term. It's better to take one day off than to miss a week. Right? But we see this all the time, and we know this is a difficult one because you want to follow what you think is the optimal program, but we know when the athlete's health is impacted, when they have a physical kind of injury, it's much easier to manage the situation at the very beginning. But having the confidence to do that is often what's missing. And certainly when I think about this, I think if I have a doubt about the training that they're going to do, we don't do it. And we go in the order of eliminating intensity first, or dropping the intensity, then dropping the session volume if we need to, and only then frequency. So if an athlete has some kind of issue, I try to maintain frequency first as the primary. But if there's a doubt about it, we don't do it. And I'm quite confident to do that. And the more we as coaches, but also this is where the athlete responsibility comes in, the more that the athletes learn to do that, that's when it becomes powerful. When they tell you, I've got an issue, I'm not sure if I can do this session. As soon as they say that, you probably know they're not doing the session. But we need to train them to take ownership of that process. And all of the top athletes I know, they never get there completely because they have the same issues about confidence as everyone else, but they're more willing to say, I have an issue, what do you think we should do about it? I think when we have that kind of relationship with our athletes, we're getting towards the relationship which can be effective towards really producing optimal performance. So I have no hesitation about changing the program. All within the context here of expanding our limitations. So it's not about, oh, the athlete's a little bit tired. No, we're talking about health issues, injury issues. And it's a balance. In order to go from point A to point B, in order to go from 700 hours a year to 1,000 hours a year, if you're always dropping sessions, you're not going to do it. So we have to find the right moments, and that's where our skill as coaches, our skill in observation, watching the athletes, talking to them, getting them to take ownership as well, comes into play. So the summary. The most important principle for me, managing intensity, type, progression. If there's one thing that we can do better as coaches, learning how to manage our quality sessions will have a big impact on the progression of our athletes. It's the most common issue that I come across too much, too often, and then that impacting consistency and recovery. And the second point, managing how we plan the season, how we plan races, but also how we plan training. And that point is, again, very common. I talk about this all the time in my daily work, and I think about it all the time, because every year is a little bit different, the calendar, the program. What's the right program for this year? How much travel? Where can we fit a training block in? This year, as we approach the Olympic test event, we look at the calendar, for example. It's a very dense summer period, from May to September. A lot of competitions. This is one positive and negative in triathlon. We have a lot of choice. We can race all the time, but we have to choose the right ones, what makes sense, and not only for which events, but where can we fit training? How do we plan training around that so that we are ready to perform at the level we want on the day? And then the nutrition and sleeping practices. That's it for me. I put my email address up there. I don't hear from many of you. In the last year, I've not got many emails. Email me. You probably have opinions about me, about my work. I want to hear them. Feel free. Thank you.